Welcome to Theology Thursday, an ecumenical space for students to discuss matters of faith and theology.
I'm your host, Connor Grubbs.
I am your co-host, Ryan Mock.
And I'm your co-host, Johnny Grubbs.
Well, we're here. It's Thursday probably for those of you listening. Wednesday for us. I like this studio, guys.
I do too. I think it makes me feel like I'm a podcaster.
Yeah.
Even though you aren't.
No. I'm a fake.
I like your shirt.
Thanks.
My
My mom got this for me
Wow.
at Walmart.
Wow.
Yeah, we're at Walmart now.
No. Where can you actually get that shirt, Ryan?
You could get this shirt by being a supporter of the show on Patreon.
Correctamundo. So
I passed.
there's 3 tiers. Okay, tier 1, that's $3 a month. You get the after show. We reacted to the God's Not Dead 4 trailer last week. A lot of fun. Tier 2, you get the after show and a once a month podcast called Theology Thursday Reading Hour, where we discuss books that we're reading. And then tier 3, which is, I don't remember.
Ooh.
There's 3, 6, might be 9.
You get to go to lunch with the Theology Thursday
Whoa,
crew.
That's $400
Hold the
a
phone.
month. But the tier 3 you get the merch too, so things like the t-shirts.
Woo woo.
We're doing mugs soon. We're also the t-shirts. We will do a new design once we run out of these. So sign up. Let's do it. You can have both. It's gonna be great.
Best of both worlds, you might say.
Like that one Hannah Montana song.
I think I still have 80 prints left of this. So
We got a lot to go through.
we need some patrons. No, but your support genuinely, it does help us to continue doing what we're doing and hopefully to continue doing it better and better. So thank you to those who have been supporting us and yeah, subpoints. Let us begin. This week's subpoint is about another Christian movie that's coming out. Okay, so we discussed God's Not Dead last week on the after show. This week I wanted to discuss the documentary that's coming out called The Jesus Music. Okay, and so this is a documentary basically chronicling the history of contemporary worship music.
Oh, that'll be
Christian music.
That'll be interesting.
So it kind of starts around the hippie movement and the Jesus movement that came out of that. You know, a lot of Calvary Chapel churches kind of came out of that. And that was kind of where it started, the idea of the contemporary worship of, let's use like drums and electric guitars and worship.
Whoa.
And so they're interviewing like Res Band, which is an old one. Then you got like Michael W. Smith, Chris Tomlin. All these guys are actually getting like interviewed, and then they're going back and kind of going through the history. So I do want to see this movie. I'm interested. I love documentaries, but I'm a little skeptical because it is produced by K-Love. So I feel like there's
kind of sus.
I feel like there's a little bit of a bias going in. But I can't tell. I mean, there's some people involved in it, like Lecrae and people like that I feel like have a little bit higher standards. Like, they're not gonna be a part of something that they feel misrepresents history.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that it's honest with maybe some of the darker aspects of the Christian music industry, maybe some of the darker motives, I should say.
So maybe they are going to reveal the Chris Tomlin factory.
Maybe. There's one part in the trailer where Toby Mac is like, I've never told anybody this before. And it's like, what?
He knows.
Toby Mac accidentally ripped one of the Chris Tomlin robots' arm off.
Yeah.
No, they're not robots.
They're
clones.
Actually clones, like from Star Wars. Yeah.
Okay, so Toby Mac walked in on the test tubes or something.
That looks like a baby Tomlin.
and then he stole one. Maybe he has one. Maybe he's been
Like a
raising
pet Tomlin.
Maybe he's been raising a baby Tomlin, and that's what he's going to reveal. He's like, hey guys, I want to take you to my penthouse. I'm going to show you something I've never shown anybody.
This is baby Tomlin Jr.
He's got...
Get it!
No, so weird. Anyway, I feel that maybe it's not going to be, honestly critical of, like, maybe some of the...
Yeah, do we really think Caleb would be critical of contemporary Christian music?
Right.
I don't know. I think there's a help. I don't know that he would be. Okay, I mean it's part of his like bread and butter. But
Caleb's not a person, Johnny. Caleb radio. It's like Christian radio. It's like
I'm just
Hey,
speaking
Caleb has feelings too. Don't dehumanize him.
okay. Sorry.
All right, she, he, they, them.
Z-
It's not a person. It's an organization.
You don't know who a person is.
What is a person?
Oh boy.
I always thought that Caleb was both a station and a DJ
No.
for some reason.
No.
I think you just made that up.
I did. I mean, obviously, I just materialized that in my head. But I just always thought, hey, it's Caleb coming at you in the morning.
Maybe you've developed some kind of like parasocial relationship with Caleb, like through listening to Caleb. You've developed this persona of Caleb.
Yeah, I think I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Either way, what I'll tell you that is this: there is a way to appreciate music written for the church, and still be honest about some of the harsh aspects of it.
Yeah, there's no question that this film is made to celebrate,
Right.
you know, but that doesn't mean that they can't be critical within that,
Right.
you know. So I'm hoping, I'm interested to see it, you know. We'll see what happens.
We'll see.
Not a very interesting set point, but it's there, you know.
Yeah.
Go see the Jesus music. It's given us plenty of stuff to talk about, though, when these films actually come out.
It's called Jesus music. What's it called?
The Jesus music.
The Jesus music.
Well, just continue to pray for Caleb and his ministry.
For just $1 a day.
You could support a baby Chris Tomlin.
So did Toby Mac find a way to keep his Chris Tomlin clone an infant?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess, Bill, because he was taken from the factory, I guess he couldn't receive the necessary sustenance to grow into a fully formed Chris Tomlin.
I just imagine like a rather large baby with a fully grown man head.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, you know, of Chris Tomlin. That's what I imagine. And he's like, goo goo! Sorry, this is getting ridiculous.
Okay.
So today, we are going to talk about Christian Zionism.
Ooh.
It's totally non-controversial.
Woo! So Zionism, we'll start there. Zionism is actually, I was surprised to find, fairly recent ideology.
Oh, man.
Yep. Yeah, Zionism, there's Zionism and then there's Christian Zionism. Interestingly enough, Christian Zionism actually comes before Zionism. But to put it, just to get the definitions out there, Zionism is a national movement for the return of the Jewish people to their homeland and the resumption of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. So it's this national movement to get Jewish people back in Israel and to establish Israel as a sovereign state. So that's Zionism. And then Christian Zionism has a religious twist on this. Christian Zionism is it's Christian support for Zionism. But where the religious aspect comes in is that Christian Zionists are much more interested in the prophetic fulfillment of Israel, the state of Israel. Christian Zionists view the establishment of the state of Israel as a fulfillment of prophecy, and that God is using the state of Israel to fulfill his purposes here on earth. So that's the religious twist of Zionism. But as Connor said, Zionism is a recent development in history. If we think about the church over the course of 2,000 years, we know that the church has generally been very anti-Jew. Okay, we think about, for example, we hear about Martin Luther, and what did Martin Luther say about the Jews? Martin Luther didn't like the Jews a lot, and he wrote some very anti-Semitic stuff about the Jewish people. So for most of Christian history, Christians have been very anti-Jew. In the 17th century, we see the rise of the Puritans, and actually we see an interesting development with the Puritans with their eschatology. They are postmillennial. And if you're wondering what postmillennialism is, we did a few episodes on eschatology. The basic premise is that the world gets better, the world becomes more Christian, and then Jesus returns, the second coming. And in the postmillennial view, many Puritans believed that at the end of time there would be a mass conversion of Jewish people. Now that's not Zionist. That might be what we could call a proto-Zionism, because what developed from that idea was that many Puritans, many reformers believed that that Jewish people would become Christian, and then a very natural result of that is that they would establish a nation for themselves. So that's a kind of proto-Zionism. And then in the 19th century, this develops more in Europe. What happens in Europe is, in European history, particularly in the 19th century, there is a lot of turmoil, right? There's wars. We know about Napoleon. Napoleon's taken over half of Europe. There's all these revolutions. And what does that do to eschatology? We know that in eschatology, many people, they interpret their eschatology by the current events. And so in Europe in the 19th century, there is a return to a historic premillennialism. And with that, there's more interest in the prophetic fulfillment of Israel, and there's more interest in Israel itself. And this is also emphasized because of that market revolution. There's more travel. There are tourists to Israel. You could go visit Israel now. And there's a lot of literature about Israel. And so there's a lot of interest in Israel from the Christian perspective. And this, by the way, you guys can stop me at any time. I don't want to be lecturing here.
No, I like it.
Okay, excellent.
This is a good setup.
There's a lot of Christian interest in Israel because of this theological development, this return to historic premillennialism. But it's still tied to this idea that the Jewish people will convert to Christianity, because historic premillennialism is still, well, it's not dispensationalism, and we're going to get to that in just a second. And what happens in Europe, and this bleeds over into America, is this actually bleeds into the politics. And now we're hearing politicians advocate for this kind of for some kind of proto-Zionism, this desire to see the Jewish people have their nation. And then we get to dispensationalism. And dispensationalism, I guess, I don't know what, Johnny, you have prepared for this discussion. I don't know if you have anything about dispensationalism itself. But dispensationalism changes the game for Christian Zionism. Dispensationalism was developed in the mid to late 19th century. Most notably, a dude who really, I guess you could say, founded it was John Nelson Darby. He was in Europe, and he wrote several books about it. And then we know about Cyrus Scofield. If you're familiar with the Scofield Reference Bible, that comes into play in the 20th century. But it's very influential for distributing ideas about dispensationalism, for spreading dispensationalism throughout the country, through Europe, and through America, and dispensationalism becomes very popular. And to break down dispensationalism do you have anything on this, by the way?
No. I mean, not yet. No.
Okay. To break down dispensationalism very quickly, this dispensationalism really requires a whole episode of its own. But to just break it down very quickly, it's a hermeneutical framework for how we understand the Bible. Dispensationalism.
Frameworks for understanding things. Sorry.
Yeah, like some other things that we have.
Sounds very immoral.
Sounds like you're using your noggin there, son.
Uh-oh, that's a problem. So, dispensationalists believe that the Bible is separated into a certain amount of dispensations. A dispensation is quite simply a period of time. And so dispensationalists believe that we can understand the Bible as several different dispensations in which God works differently with different people. And so the early dispensationalists like Darby and Scofield and whatnot, they generally said there were 7 different dispensations in the Bible. 7 different times in which God has a different plan for different people. That's a very simplistic understanding of dispensationalism, and I'm sure some dispensationalists out there would be like, you're misrepresenting me. We can talk about that later. But just very simply put, that's how it is. God works differently. He has different plans for different people. And so that means that God has a different plan for Israel than he does for the church. I don't know if I'm speaking for myself or if I'm speaking for both Johnny and Connor here, but I believe that the church is the true Israel. And so there's a big difference here in interpretation. There's a whole different framework at work here in coming to the text.
Yeah. Just real quick, I want to note, like,
I'm just kidding.
You have some great stuff. I just, this is probably all I can contribute to the conversation, so I want to do it. The reason that this is problematic, and I felt it was, I think you're going to get into why it could be problematic. The reason that I wanted to bring this up is let's just give some practical examples of like how this bleeds over into modern American thought. I mean, for one, now you have Christians who think that any politician who is pro-Israel is pro-Christian, and they want to go for that person. As if for some reason America should be giving them special precedence.
And I think those politicians know that too.
Right,
so
they're doing that to cater to, evangelicals who think this way. But I also seen even more recently with more current events, it lead to this really like blind and like unwavering support for Israel. In the case recently where Israel was going into Palestine and taking land that it claimed as their own land, much of it according to Scripture, saying like this is our land, because God has given it to us, and going in and displacing innocent people in another country. Yeah. And immediately, most Christians were like, well, yeah, I mean, it is the land that God has given to them, so that's their right to do that. When in reality, it's not a good thing, right? Yeah. So this is where it bleeds over into like modern day, is that I think there's this hyper focus and oftentimes a blind and unhealthy, like blind support for Israel.
Yeah. And part of that too, my understanding of what I was told growing up is you're gonna want to be on Israel's side when the Lord comes back, or else you're gonna be in trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and that comes from Tim LaHaye and all these different things, and also to look to Israel for signs of the end times. Like when people start going against Israel, then you better watch out, because that means the Lord's coming back. And that event, and the other thing that was kind of came out of a lot of that Tim LaHaye, so was like that eventually all the nations would turn against Israel. And so there was this emphasis on America protecting it, but it's like, well, even according to this framework, eventually America's going to turn on them too, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, according to that theology, they should, but there's a lot of people who say, well, no, we're gonna we're gonna stand. We're gonna be the only people that stand with Israel.
Yeah.
We're the exception
which,
to the rule.
by the way, has no theological precedent. Like, that doesn't even logically carry through in their
right
theological framework. There's no reason for that except that you like America.
Yeah. I want to finish my history lesson.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wanted to point that out, that there's some modern applications of this.
Absolutely. So 19th century dispensationalism becomes very popular, and there's a growing interest in the idea of a Jewish nation, even among politicians. Ironically enough, Napoleon was the first politician to propose a sovereign Jewish state, even though Napoleon was an atheist. But that's just a little factoid for you. So the 19th century is very formative for this. And then in the 20th century, three big things happen. The first one is the Balfour Declaration. During World War One, everybody was fighting, okay? And the Middle East, the Palestinian region, we know now today, was controlled by the Ottomans. And Britain, at this time, Britain and France were very interested in the Middle East for economic reasons. And so Britain makes a promise to the Arabs in the Palestinian region. The Britain promises you all could self-govern. Okay, that's the first promise that Britain makes. And then Britain does an old switcheroo and goes to France and says, after World War I, that area, it's going to be kind of an international area, and then you, France and me, we will split up Palestine, and you guys could kind of have control over one area, we got control over the other area. So that's the second promise that Britain makes. And then comes the Balfour Declaration. That's in 1917. This was written by Arthur Balfour, and he says this is an official statement from Britain that he develops. Is that we are going to be committed to creating a sovereign Jewish state. We are committed to getting the Jews to Israel. And so after World War I, in the Middle East and in many developing countries, we have what's called mandate states. And mandate states were states that were created by the Allied powers that kind of function as Allied colonies. So this is a whole history lesson here that's probably not necessary. But the Allied powers believed that people should be able to govern for themselves, but they needed help along the way. So these Allied powers like America and Great Britain would have control over these colonies in these developing countries as they develop for themselves. So with the Balfour Declaration, Britain has control over Palestine after World War I, and it becomes like a British colony. And during this time, huge amounts of Jewish people migrate to Palestine. And we know that in this process, as the Jews come into Palestine, the Palestinians are pushed out. So this is the second big event. In 1948, this mandate ends. So Britain has to pull away from this region. And so when they pull away, this is a huge point here. When they pull away, this is when Israel becomes a state, 1948. And that's huge for, we know when for many Zionists, this is the moment.
Right.
This, when 1948, this is when Israel became a state. This is the beginning of, prophecy fulfillment.
Yeah, exactly. That was their take on it. And I just want to go ahead and go on the record as saying that there were a lot of course, political reasons behind that, but there was this urgency because there were Jewish people coming out of concentration camps that had no place to go.
Yes.
They didn't have any living family from where they were from, and really this, for all of its flaws, it had some really good things in terms of functioning as basically a refugee program for displaced Holocaust survivors.
Here's the thing about Middle Eastern affairs It's very complicated.
It's very messy, but I would say that, like, just as, like, in terms of human dignity and stuff like that, the refugee aspect of the establishment of Israel was a good thing. It doesn't hurt for those people to have their own space in the world.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think we're trying to give any commentary on the current affairs in the Middle East. I am not a scholar in Middle Eastern affairs, and so surely I'm not qualified to make statements about what they should or shouldn't do. I'm just giving you the history here. So that's the second big thing. Israel becomes an actual state in 1948. And then the third big thing is 1967 is the Six-Day War that Israel has with this Arab coalition. And this is also huge because in the Six-Day War, what Israel does is Israel manages to take back control of all of Jerusalem. Now, this is another moment for Zionists where it's like, this is fulfillment right here. They have taken back control of Israel. And this is 1967 is really when Christian Zionism becomes huge in America. This is when we begin to see these all these U.S. presidents suddenly become very pro-Israel. They had been pro-Israel in the past. They had supported the idea of a Jewish nation, but for some reason, after 1967, all of the presidents that we've had have come out very strongly in support of Israel and being pro-Israel, and this has become seeped into U.S. politics now.
And we have John Hagee to thank for some of that.
Absolutely. Particularly after 1967, there's a lot of literature that was published by Christian authors, Christian speakers, Christian preachers about Israel and about the end times. This is where you get like the Left Behind series, the late Great Planet Earth, stuff like that becomes very popular. And so it seeps into modern evangelical culture. Nowadays, many people, they can't think about evangelicalism without associating with Zionism. You know, there's a marriage between evangelicalism and Christian Zionism that has developed in America.
So here's what I'll say about are we?
I'm done.
Okay. All right. So here's where.
Wait, I just. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah,
Good
thank
job.
you.
That history degree is really paying off, huh?
I took no classes about Israel in
No, but I can tell that you like history. You got a good way of kind of compiling the information and then communicating it. So
thank you.
I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
You're a little house
Absolutely.
historian. Now for the house heretic. Sure.
Well, here's the thing. You can't shy away from the fact, and you didn't, but it's so closely tied to America and American politics and popular American eschatology at different points in time, right? And I think that the most problematic part of it is that Zionism elevates a people group and nation above others, which is something that, I'm a hot take here, this is something that America has no problem doing, right? And so if Israel is to be elevated, well, we're going with them, right? So here we stand, America and Israel, but it's interesting that they developed that theology because it's not the theology of the kingdom. And I think that's the biggest problem with Christian Zionism is if we look at like the idea of evangelion and this declaration that God's kingdom is here and that the Messianic King is a ruler of it, then Israel matters just as much as Palestine, just as much as Ireland, as America. Nobody's exceptional at that point. Everybody is in need of the kingdom of God to come where they are. And so that's not the message of Christian Zionism. It is that this people group needs to be elevated and pushed forward. And it's actually a little bit degrading. It can be degrading because really the only interest at that point in the people is their ability or their role, basically as pawns, to move the story that we've adopted, or that people have adopted, the Tim LaHaye story, forward, right? So it's actually reductionist of who the people of Israel are. It can be.
No, they're God's chosen people. That's why, Johnny. It's not to move anything forward. It's because the Bible tells us that they're God's chosen people.
There are many that, were formerly anti-Semitic that are part of this movement that now are like, oh, pro-Israel, but...
Because they got saved and they realized that they're God's chosen people, Johnny.
But the only reason there is that they're useful insofar as bringing the kingdom of God faster.
No, they're God's chosen people.
Which is a gross misunderstanding of what the kingdom of God is. It's not just,
And that's a misunderstanding of who God's people are.
Right. And that's that's the other thing about like being grafted in the gospel.
Right, and I think we see it in Paul's ministry and in the early church that there's this shift that happens with Christ that there is an emphasis under the old covenant. Obviously, there's an emphasis on Israel, but that's completely shattered in the new covenant.
Right.
There's the church, which as you're describing earlier, I do think we're all in agreement with the idea that the church is the new Israel. It's or
at least the true Israel.
But yeah, and this is the church is God's chosen people, and it's very clear that every tribe, every tongue, every nation, is represented in the body of Christ. So, yeah, it's a little.
Yeah, I would just want to quickly clarify. I don't think we believe that the church replaces Israel, but rather that the church was the true Israel all along, and that the nation of Israel was a foreshadowing of that, or a physical manifestation of that in the Old Testament. So I just want to clarify. We don't believe in like a replacement theology where the church replaces Israel or anything like that. Like the church has always been those who have faith in God are the children of Abraham, right? That's what Paul says.
Right. Well, and isn't that kind of the picture of being grafted in? Is it's not a replacement.
Right.
It's, hey, this was just a piece of it.
Right.
Here's the full picture.
Yeah.
And so I do think that's important to understand. But yeah, it gets us into a lot of like political and theological weeds when we think this way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's problematic because it doesn't I don't think it sees people, or it can become a thing where we don't see people as whole people. It's like the Palestinians are reduced in their identity, it's the anti-Israel people. Israelis are reduced in their identity as the people that are going to make Christ come back,
Yeah.
And
America's elevated to the people who are going to help them.
Exactly, right? And we're the heroes in the story. They come alongside them. And so I think that nations are just that. They're just nations, and that God is willing and wants to rescue people from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. And so I think there are some people who would hear me say some of this stuff and say, oh, he's anti-Semitic. Believe it or not, there's many in the movement of Christian Zionism who would say, well, that's just a subtle form of anti-Semitism, and it's just not the case. Like I would much rather. I gotta be careful. I don't want to call out organizations, but I would much rather. When I was part of Operation Mobilization, they had a camp on the Sea of Galilee. It was a camp, sharing the gospel, talking about Christ with Israeli children. It was a really cool ministry. I would much rather be a part of that there or anywhere else really in the world than like a political organization. And there have been political organizations that have been made in the name of biblical thought, and it's like it just gets the waters get very muddy very quickly.
Yeah, right.
Another thing that I just want to emphasize about dispensationalism has been super important for the development of Christian Zionism. You cannot understand Christian Zionism without understanding dispensationalism. But You can be a dispensationalist and not be a Christian Zionist.
Yeah.
That would be a generalization that would be incorrect to make, is that if you are dispensationalist, then you are a Christian Zionist. That is not the case. But surely most every Christian Zionist I have ever encountered has been dispensationalist.
Right. And I have spoken with people that, I love dearly, but they try to separate it. Like, just try to separate in your mind the eschatology from, the fact that Christians should be pro-Israel. And I'm like, Christians should be pro
everybody.
So,
I mean, there's a
unless
reason.
you have that eschatology, then you can justify that. But so you can't separate it from that eschatology.
Yeah. I just think neither Jew nor Greek. Like there's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the way of Christ does not emphasize or elevate any people group or any nation above another. It's just not. Doesn't fit into a gospel framework.
So I'm big on world missions. I love it. I love the idea that we could share this good news and be a witness to Jesus, who we follow everywhere. So I love Israel.
Yeah.
It's not that I support the nation state of Israel. I don't even, I don't have allegiance to any nation on this planet. I'm an American citizen. That's it. But I don't have allegiance to anything other than Christ and His kingdom.
Nice.
Sound like a socialist to me. Sound like a socialist liberal freak.
Yeah, you Marxist, coffee drinking, Starbucks drinking Marxist.
So I think the real takeaway is love everybody.
Love everybody,
especially the Jews.
Wait.
And I want to get a T-shirt. We should get a T-shirt as part of our merch. Eschatology matters.
It does. Yep.
I think that there was a time where Revelation was just so spooky and weird for people that they were just like, yeah, I'll just read Left Behind instead, And it's like, it's really caused a lot of problems. The spillover of bad eschatology is so detrimental. Yeah. And so I would encourage you, not that we're the arbiters of truth necessarily, but go back and listen to our eschatology series. How we read our Bibles and understanding genres and all that kind of stuff is so important to all of this.
Yeah, for sure. I think most of the New Testament, as far as genre, is pretty straightforward. I mean, we have like the Gospels and Acts, and then we have a bunch of letters, and it's like, Revelation is certainly in the New Testament. I think as far as like structure and as far as apocalyptic literature, like that is the thing we are the most far removed from. Like as far as having like a historical understanding of how they would have understood it.
Right, and this is like almost becomes a whole separate podcast, but because of that, we also don't recognize that genre in the Old Testament when it comes up.
Yeah.
Because it's already established for us many times in the Old Testament, and we don't know that. We don't know how to recognize it.
So don't just read your Bible, but study it.
Yeah.
And study it well.
In BibleProject.com. Sorry, I just love the Bible Project.
You do like the Bible Project.
Yeah,
not a sponsor. Maybe they should be. So yeah, there you go. We're gonna jump on the after show and chat a little bit more. So if you're a patron, you can join us there. If not, then become one and join us there. It's gonna be great. Any closing thoughts though?
No.
All right. Well, Ryan, go ahead.
Ya yeet.